Let's go to the phone lines. The number to dial, 888-ASK-HANK, Rex in Houston, Texas, listening on Sirius XM 131. Hi, Rex.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. Quick question. I know the Southern Baptist Convention changed their views in the mid-'80s on women serving under the title as pastor, and they used several scriptures to support this decision. But they believe in the priesthood of all believers. I serve with a lady who has a title of pastor in a ministry. It's evangelistic in nature, and we travel around. So my question is clarity on the scripture. Does that just disqualify her as being a pastor outside of the church? Is it just in the church, the actual physical body of the church? She went through the program and got her pastoral degree. So is she not allowed scripturally to have that title as pastor if she's not functioning in the church?
Well, I think on the big, broad picture, if a woman has a talent to teach, she ought to use that talent to teach. However, I think it's also wise for us to look at two things. One is the precedent that we find in Scripture, both in the Old and New Testament, and two, the precedent that we find historically from the time of the emergence of the early New Testament church until the present. But in terms of women in ministry in general, I think it's very interesting that in a culture in which women were largely illiterate and unlearned, we have the Apostle Paul saying that until a woman learns, she should not presume to teach. However, he does not tell her that she must be silent in all circumstances. He teaches women how to pray and prophesy publicly, and therefore, obviously, they're not supposed to be silent or mute in that sense. And I think another very telling aspect of Paul's admonition in Scripture is that he does not chastise Eve for her role in the fall. Instead, he chastised Jewish men for excluding women from learning and therefore leaving them vulnerable to deception. Just as Adam was responsible for failing to protect Eve from deception, so too the men of Paul's day were going to be held responsible for hindering women from studying and growing in their faith. I think there's another point that ought to be made, and that's a cultural context, and that is matriarchal authoritarianism. And this was practiced in the pagan cults of that day. Ephesus, for example, where Timothy ministered, was the home of a cult dedicated to a pagan goddess named Artemis. And worship of Artemis, it was conducted under the authority of an entirely female priesthood that exercised authoritarian dominion over male worshipers. And therefore, in that context, Paul emphasized that women should not pursue undue authority over men, but in the whole, of course, neither elevated women over men nor men over women, but was actually concerned that men and women be granted equal opportunity to learn and grow in submission to one another and to God. So that's the precedent in general, but I think what you find in terms of precept and principle, both in Scripture and in history, is that the ruling leader in the hierarchy of the church be a male as opposed to a female. And again, that comes from both the Old, the New Testament, as well as what we find from historical precedents.